Hey, what's going on? I go by the name of Neak. I'm here at 24/7 HH, and you live on my King Beats right here, right now, for the record Gold off my new album Kwesbaar. Man, it's a crazy, crazy backstory to this record. When I was working on my album Kwesbaar, it was actually done already. This record was a part of a process. I was just working on records with my homie Kenneth Leffridge from Left Jones. He was coming to the house. It was like during the summer last year. And we were just making records right on the spot. Like I would just start making beats and he would just like play his tenor saxophone. We would kind of come up with some different rhythms. And yeah, this is how this record came about. We made the beat. I started off with the drums first. I always start off with the drums for the most part, for most of my beats. He started off playing some sax riffs, and then I just started digging through the records. I had just went record shopping maybe a week before I started working on this record. I think I got the record from Hyde Park Records, if I'm not mistaken. It was either Hyde Park or it was either Reckless in Wicker Park. Not sure, don't quote me, but got the record, put on the record and just started hearing the sound to it. I'm actually gonna play the record that I sampled Gold from, and I just walk through the record and just kind of give you my mindset as to how I go about sampling and how I go about choosing the parts that I use. This record was made by Trae Tha Truth. Turn You to Love. For all you diggers out there, I just gave you a gem. I'm not gonna be like a lot of people that I was raised to be like, not tell you the record, but Trae Tha Truth, 1979, jazz, from Elektra Asylum Records. It was recorded in Los Angeles, California, 1979. It just looks like you want to purchase it, right? Good energy just looking at the record. You know, a lot of times there's a story just looking at the record. You can tell like, man, there's something on it, something special. And when I looked at it, it spoke to me. So once again, the first thing that I do is I go through the entire record and I let the entire record play just so I can get a feel for what direction I want to go or how I feel like I want to chop up the record. It's one chop. There should have been like 2 or 3 other chops. But what I look for is when I'm sampling records is I look for the sounds, I look for the instruments, and I like to sample things that are kind of open, where it's not a lot going on, but I can get a good feel for the record. Because on the back end, when I add a lot of instruments that I use, I don't want it to be too clustered or too bunched up on the production side. It's chop number 2. Chop number 3. Chop number 4. So the record has about 4 to 6 chops in it. And then I just let the record go. There were some other chops that I ended up getting, but I didn't use for the actual beat. Might be for beat number 2. But that's essentially the process as I'm going through the record. And I sample mainly off the record because it's just a certain feel. You know, vinyl, it's like no other. This is the original sound recording pressed out. It's not decompressed through the internet. It's not watered down through millions of downloads and re-uploads or things of that nature. The actual record is the actual sound recording, so you get all of the textures, all of the feelings of the music when it was originally recorded. And that's the main reason why I majority of the time sample from vinyl. And when I started making beats a few years ago, I started learning from a lot of the people that I work with about how to dig for records, how to go about getting records. You know, what musicians do I need to look for? You know, what sounds do I need to look for? What time period? What record labels? You know, things of that nature. What genres? This is from the genre of jazz. This record was made in 1979. It's typically a record or a year I wouldn't go for because of the year. That's when a lot of disco came in, and sometimes it's hard to sample from a lot of disco records. But there was something about this record that just spoke to me. I looked at it. I looked at the instruments on the back that was used on the record. All right, so before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about my setup. The epicenter of all my beats, MPC 2000 XL, and the MPC Renaissance. For this particular beat, I actually made the original beat in the MPC Renaissance, but I brought in the 2000 XL for this particular session because I wanted people to understand I can break down the technicalities a little bit better on this end. The first thing that I started off with this beat, I started off with the drums. I either sample my drums in two ways. I either take a lot of one shots or I take a beat break, and I condense it down to a one shot. For this particular record, it was an actual break off a record that I sampled, and then I chopped it down into individual shots. And what I mean by that is I put, for example, like a hi-hat on one pad, a snare on another pad, a kick on another pad. So in this situation, if you look at pad 10, there's the kick there, there's another kick, and I have the hi-hat on one of them just to kind of give it a little extra variation to it. There's a kick there. I'm at snare. There's a snare there. And there's your hi-hat. And if you play it in conjunction with each other, you got something like this. You see what I'm saying? So when you break the kicks down to each individual pad, the kick and the snare, you have more control over the break itself. So I can play any break that I want, and I can manipulate the drums however I best please. So in this situation, the original drums, the highs, it was a little higher. So what I did was in the MPC 2000 XL, I would go to the section where I would tune them down. So I tuned it down, I would say, to about a -20, just to kind of slow up the pace and change the tone on the drums and the kicks. Because the original beat is at 86.50, the original beat of gold. So when I broke down the sample a little bit more, I wanted to kind of pull the drums out to kind of follow along with the beat a little bit better than it was at its original state. But that was the first thing that I did, was when I got the drum break, I just chopped it down. That way I can have control over it, as you can see here. The next step that I did is when I sampled the actual record, it's a piece of equipment I don't have in front of me, but what I do is before I sample in, I use the SP202 and the SP303. So with the SP202, that's how I get a grainier sound, more of a crunchy sound to the sample. You know, I can lo-fi it, I can sample it at a standard bit rate, I can sample it at lo-fi 1, lo-fi 2, whichever sound that I want to kind of give it the extra, what producers call the extra dirt. So I like my samples dirty. I like everything analog and dirty for the most part when it comes to the sound and the texture of the beat. I put my chops through the SP202 first. That way I can get a particular sound. The sound here that you hear is not the actual originating sound from the record. You can hear it actually. If you're a producer, you know, you can hear the dirtiness on the sample. You know, that way that I can get a particular sound that I got the particular sound that I wanted. So what I did was when I chop up records, I go through the entire record and I look for different things that stand out to me. What I do is I don't, sometimes when I'm going through the record, I can find maybe 3 parts that I want to chop down. I can find 12, I can find 4. It really depends. You know, in this situation, it was just a particular part on the record that was just phenomenal to me. And I also like to put a lot of vocal undertones in my samples. Different jazz records, different soul records, they got excellent vocalists. Man, that's a that's a blessing for me, because when I'm going through the record and I can hear the sound and the textures of the voices, it just sounds amazing. And I just, you know, I like to manipulate it a little bit and just, you know, see what I can come up with. So what I did was I put each individual chop on a different pad. That way I can have a little bit more control over the beat, you know, as I decide to make it. And the thing about the MPC 2000 XL, it has this, the analog sound is just amazing. So the thing is, the sound engine that comes through this machine is amazing. It comes through and it gives the record a different character. It gives it more life to me. So when I'm playing the sample through the SP202 that gives me the dirty, grainier sound, then I bring it through the MPC 2000 XL, and it gives it more life and more of an analog feel. I mean, it's just, it's beautiful. You know, it gives it a sound that you can't get necessarily dealing with a lot of digital equipment, you know, that you can just drag and drop into Ableton or something like that. So already, as I'm hearing the beat and as I'm making the beat, it has the feel and the texture and the emotions that I like to come along with it. And with the gold beat, it's really, from the MPC part, it's only 2 stems. And stems is basically different tracked out instruments on each individual track. So track 1, drums, track 2, samples. So as you can hear it, that's the original drum break that I flipped around and chopped a little bit. And then you have the sample itself. And then what I did was, once I chopped it up in the MPC 2000 XL and I tracked out the instruments into Ableton, that's where I do all of my recording, you know, vocal recording, instrument recording, things like that. What I did was I manipulated the chops even more. I'm just freehanding at that point, just mouse clicking and just moving around different parts of the stems, just to give it even more variation outside of what I already did in the MPC 2000 XL. Yeah, that's the majority structure of this beat. Everything else, as far as the bass, pulling out the bass, all of that comes in the mix and mastering phase, where you can change the frequencies and the EQs in the beat to give it a different feel and to give it a different mode. You know, like I was explaining earlier, I used the Mini V filter from Arteria to kind of give it a lo-fi sound. So when the different instrumentation came in, the piano, the sax, it could kind of go to the background. It can let the instruments come to the forefront. So it's just a lot of different manipulation tactics that I used in Ableton as well, in conjunction with the MPC 2000 XL to give it that feel, and the SP202. I looked at the musicians that played on the record, and I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get it. And I got it for a good price too, got it for a steal. And when the chops were made, gold was born. We started making a beat. It was just a beat. It wasn't, you know, wasn't gonna do a song or anything like that. The next day, got up, I listened to the beat again. I'm like, man, I really like this. So I just sat down, started writing it. And for some reason, I don't know, the concept just came to me. It just made me start thinking about how we use so many different things from a materialistic standpoint to kind of cover up how we really feel about ourselves, especially us as black people. So it was like, let me talk about that, but let me dig deep into it to like, from my perspective as to why. Because, you know, I was like that at a certain point. You know, it was like everything that came out, I had to have the newest this newest that. Like even in the song, I say, you know, I was talking about getting a fresh pair of Jordans for no reason, using my credit card. I could have paid a bill with that, but that's here nor there. But yeah, so I recorded the record. Kenneth Lethbridge came over. He came back over, and I was like, you know, lay some horns on it for me. You know, let me know what you think about it. And he was like, yeah, because we was just working on records. He laid the horns on. I was like, whoa, this record has potential. Has a lot of potential. So I started digging in even more into it. So this is the stems of the tenor saxophone. And once again, when I collaborate with musicians, I kind of let them do them. I don't get in the way because I feel like whatever they lay, I can rearrange it however. In this instance, I pulled up the beat and he kind of just played over it. He gave me his ideas about where he wanted to put stabs, where he wanted to put a lead, you know, things like that. I told him, I said, but whatever you do, play throughout the entire record. So wherever you decide to place your arrangements, it's fine with me because I can always go back into the session and re-edit and rearrange and rechop how the sample actually goes. But for this part, he pretty much laid everything standard, came back and did 2-3 dubs on certain things like the stabs. And I kept it the way it was. It was nice the way it was. He's a very great arranger himself, so it worked out perfectly. Yeah, he put up a standard for the intro and also throughout the verse part. And then I specifically wanted him to play for the outro part because the outro is where I felt like the sax would bring his most emotion out. So when he played it, the solo, I kind of told him, you know, just go where you want to go. You know, don't think about anything in particular. Don't think about any arrangements. Just kind of fill it out. So with this particular part, this is like the horns and him just going crazy. I'm like, whatever you do with the horns, in my mind, I'm like, I hope he has a conversation with it. Just kind of like let it breathe, kind of like treat the sax like a vocal. And that's exactly what he did. And emotionally, I felt like it caught the vibe of what we was going with. Just that whole introspective thinking back into why we use the things that we have to cover up how we really feel about ourselves. Heavy on the jazz side. I love it. Real heavy on the jazz side. I'm a big Arteria fan, so after I tracked out the beat, I like filters. So I used the Mini V filter for the outro part, and I started filtering the beat and kind of giving it a grainy effect, just so I can kind of like let his horn kind of like stand out a little bit more. You know, I feel like when different instruments come in, it's like every instrument has to play a part to the next. It has to give each other space. When he laid his horn, I did that, and I laid the verses, sent him the record, and he was like, yeah, this is kind of cool. It's kind of dope. And then I stashed the record, didn't even really think about it like that. And then the record came up again because I always go back and listen to my stuff. And when I was going back listening to it, I was like, man, some piano would sound really dope on this. So my homegirl, Amanetta, who plays, she's a very dope pianist, singer. She's on tour right now with Jamila Woods. I told her, I was like, yo, come through. I got a record that I need you to play on. She came and said, cool. And then, you know, I pulled up the grand piano and she kind of just did her thing, you know. She didn't hear the record, didn't know what the record was for or had any idea about what the record was about before she heard it. Came through and I just wanted something for the outro, kind of just give it that extra emotion. You know, I don't play keys, so she came through and she really blessed me with that. The record was already completed. The vocals was laid, the sax was laid, and I kind of wanted her to capture the same essence that Kenneth did, just real soulful, real jazzy. She just really wanted to hear the sample because she wanted to know what key the song was in. So she listened to the keys for a second, the keys of the sample, and then she went back and kind of filled out the piano. And when she found a stride, I mean, she just pretty much just took it from there. Nothing crazy to it in terms of asking her to do anything specific. I'm just like, get into your talent, do what you do best. You know, I trust you to do whatever you want to do. She just made it real soulful. And I'm sitting there as she's doing it and she's playing it over the sample. I'm just like, I'm zoning out because I'm like, this record is coming to life exactly how I envisioned it. And she definitely delivered. Definitely. Classic pianist. Classically trained too. And then fast forward, I started letting some of the guys hear it. Rashid Hadi, Fillmore Green, my homeboy Sincerely Yours. And Fillmore Green was really, he was on my back about this record. He was like, you gotta put this record on the album. I don't care what you do, you gotta put off another record. Whatever you gotta do, this record gotta go on the album. And I was still like, man, I don't know, man, the album's already done. Then when we had a listening session for the album, I played the record at the end of all the other records that I played and everybody that was in that listening session. Fifth Element, Taiwan Davis, Can Be, Cousin Vinny, International MC, and a couple other guys. It was like, that record has to go. Whatever you do. It wasn't even mixed and mastered yet. It was like, but that record has to go. So that's how that record came about. We made space on it. And it fit perfectly on Kwesbaar, right after Lost Fathers and right before Remember Hold On. Speak Up. So I think it's a difference between a producer and a beat maker. You know, I feel like a beat maker is something that I do, whereas that I sit down, I program the drums, I program the samples, I play certain keys to get a particular sound. And then when it goes into production, that's when you start to think about the scope of the record, how the record is supposed to feel, the arrangements. I kind of use beat maker and production synonymous as producer. Because what I want to do is, not only do I want to sculpt the sound, I also want to bring in the right elements that can elevate the sound. And, you know, on the hip hop side, you know, I'm not saying that live instrumentation hasn't been used a lot, but I've always been that type of guy from the beginning that always liked live instrumentation. It just brings out a certain element along with the samples and along with the chops. And me not being a musician myself, quote unquote, that plays a particular instrument, that's important to me because it just brings a different life to the record. And, you know, once all of the vocals get laid and once all the other elements get laid to the beat, that's when I can start to envision how the song is supposed to sound. And as I'm making the beat, as I'm writing, as I'm programming the drums and sampling and things of that nature, that's when I start to think about what can insinuate the sound, what can pull this sample out a little bit more, what other elements are in the beat that can be brought out more from a live perspective and not necessarily from the perspective of the sample. So once I start to hear all those things in my head and I start to envision a landscape of the music, that's when I start making my calls. Hey, can you come through and lay sax? Hey, can you come through and lay keys? Hey, can you come through, play the synthesizer? Whatever it is, whatever that can bring the record to life. So that's kind of how this record went with Gold. You know, outside of the collaboration with me and Kenneth Lethbridge on the sax, bringing in Aminata was just that extra element that it needed to just drive the record home. And all of that, it may not have been envisioned up front, but as the song got completed, I started to see it on the back end. And I'm not afraid to make the call. You know, I'm very blessed to have a whole lot of musician friends that I'm more than willing and able to come through and collaborate with me. And yeah, I think it's important. I think it's important, especially when you want to create a certain sound that stands the test of time.
God body, 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 God body.